at the close of the period yesterday, we observed the fact that a similar problem in terms of the first root letter giving you grief is going to happen whenever we have a vowel that's a first nun. Example, natsal. We've now had natsal. What does natsal mean? To rescue. All right, to rescue. You're still working on the vocab. I understand that. If we wanted to make a first nun now in a Hiphil form of a first nun verb, what would happen? By the textbook, we'd add the Hiphil prefix and get hin, and of course we're going to add the infix in there, so we get hin seal. But what's going to happen, you can predict this, whenever we get a nun silent schwa. That's precisely when a nun assimilates, really takes on the next letter, it becomes the next letter, and then gets written as a double letter, all of which is a long way of saying the nun disappears and for all practical purposes becomes a dogish forte in the next root letter. So you won't see those nuns at all in the Hiphil because every form in the Hiphil puts a schwa under the first root letter. So if we had the same form in the imperfect and wanted to make it Hiphil imperfect, we would add the imperfect prefix, and again, you point it with the distinctive pathak schwa and the infix. But once again, what's going to happen? The nun schwa will assimilate and, in a sense, reappear as dogish forte in the next root letter. So that's first nuns. This is relatively easy. This is, in a sense, stuff we've seen before. What I want to look at today now are some of the harder irregular problems in the Hiphil, and there are a few where it gets a little bit difficult, or at least unusual. If we want to make the Hiphil form of a first yod verb, like yashav, okay? What happens? If you're following along in the book, first of all, there's a summary chart on page 178 that's going to summarize all of this. But I'm really going through the list that begins on page 173. Page 173, where section 2 introduces Hiphil irregular forms. You'll notice section A are guttural letters, section B are first nuns, and now we're going to look essentially at section C and talk about first yods. Now, what's troubling or confusing about first yods is that they revert back to what was an original form that actually had the first root letter as a wow. You don't know that, you do now. You didn't know that, you had no way of knowing that, you had no need of knowing that. But if truth be told, the first yod is actually a secondary development from the original verb form, which historically was a first wow. So instead of this verb being yashav, originally it was washav. Now, that's of no significance or consequence to you. You know the root is yashav. That's the way it's in the lexicon. But the fact of the matter is, when we get into some of the other conjugations, that original form shows up. And you have to sort of understand that the root's going to look like it has a wow as a first root letter instead of a yod as a first root letter. Well, all right. That's not the end of the world. Now, if the root, in fact, is washav instead of yashav, how would we make this form Hiphil? Well, once again, follow the general principle. Pretend it's regular. If it were a regular verb, what would we do? Well, we'd add our hey prefix, right? We'd point it with a herrick schwa and an infix, right? Right? And in a sense, that's what's going to happen. Now, this creates a problem, however, because that wow, now forming the end of a syllable, if you will, a closed syllable with a silent schwa, is going to become no longer the consonantal vowel, but it's going to turn into a mater letter. We've seen a similar thing happen at other times, but the fact of the matter is this, what seems to be kind of a diphthong in the language, turns into, they didn't want to have diphthongs that ended with these glide letters like y and w, so they didn't like words like hew, all right? And instead, this becomes a mater letter. Now, again, that's not the end of the world, but you are going to lose that distinctive Herrick schwa pointing. The second problem is, which mater letter? Now, if you had to pick a vowel family that would correspond to the original I schwa, you'd want an EI vowel, wouldn't you? Except that the mater letter wow functions as a mater letter not in the EI family, but in the EI-EI-O family. All right? Unfortunately, that's all we can work with a wow. So when this becomes a mater letter, it becomes the mater letter O, and instead of a hey prefix with the Herrick schwa that's distinctive of the Hiphil, we get a long vowel ho, she. Well, all right, but there it is. Ho, sheave, you still have the infix, and if we go on and conjugate this now, what would the